This FedGov Today program is sponsored by SYNAC. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, a new version of the FAR is closer than you think. Good news and bad news about AI for cyber defenders, and CMMC is here to stay for real. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. Revisions to 4 sections of the Federal Acquisition Regulation are on the street now as part of the response to the executive order titled Restoring Common Sense to Federal Procurement. The Office of Federal Procurement Policy and the FAR Council have released updates to Parts 1, 10, 34, and 52. Carla Smith-Jackson's Assistant Administrator for Procurement at NASA and a member of the FAR Council. Carla, welcome. Thanks for joining me. I won't ask you to quote chapter and verse of those 4 sections of the FAR or any others, but what is your team's role in helping with the revisions that are coming to the FAR?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today. My team, I'm one of the 3 FAR principals on the FAR Council. We've split up the FAR into 3 parts. So each of the parts of the FAR, each of the teams have sections. And so my team has a few of the sections of the FAR. We're looking at the sections and evaluating them, looking for what are those parts that are statutory or regulatory and their purpose, and we're actually taking out those pieces that are not, and we're looking at just the minimal things that the workforce needs to be able to do their job and taking out those extraneous things. And by doing so, we're able to streamline the FAR, hopefully reducing it to about 1/3 of the size when we're done.
The team that you're working with on the FAR Council also consists, as I mentioned, of GSA and OFPP. How did you decide how to divvy up what's there among those teams?
And DOD as well. I want to make sure we include
Thank you
DOD.
very much.
But what we did, we each have competencies. Each of those 3 agencies, to include OFPP as the chair, have different competencies in different areas that we specialize in. And so we took the areas that we have specialization in. And then, like for services contracting, GSA has a larger specialization in that area. It might be major systems where NASA or DOD has specialization, or cost accounting principles and that kind of thing. So we looked at that, and then each of us, although we take a principal role and a leadership role in certain parts, gets to look at all of the parts. And then we evaluate those and make comments. Once we're done with that, we each review and check, and then we do convert those FAR parts to what we call plain English language. We're using a combination of plain English language that's a mouthful. Plain English language experts and AI to be able to determine how we can best publish the plain English language sections of the FAR.
The effort that you're undertaking, it strikes me, is really important because of what you referenced earlier.
Right.
Stripping out the things that are not required by law. How would you evaluate what needs to go back, if anything, or is this exercise only revolving around taking out what's not statutorily required?
Primarily, it's only what's statutorily required or regulatory requirement. But there are some things that, for ease of reading and understanding, some procedural things that we are leaving in, kind of a commonsensical, back to the title of the EO that President Trump signed. Commonsensical things we are leaving in just for ease of understanding. We do have companion buyer's guides that each of the agencies are working on, and that's one of the things that our NAIL, we have our NASA acquisition innovation launchpad that you're very familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
We're working on the best practices that would then be a companion with each one of those FAR parts. So yes, it's skinning down to just the essence of what the FAR was intended to do. We're hoping to have better acquisition outcomes. We're hoping to have a more streamlined way of doing business and better results ultimately for our acquisition system.
What's included in the buyer's guides, and what will contracting officers find in them? How would you like to see them use them effectively?
So our goal is to have an interactive living document. So we're hoping to leverage AI, and they will be living guides, so they'll be changing. So we're looking at best practices for all across the federal government, not just the 3 agencies, GSA, DOD, and NASA, but we will be working through the CAC, which is a Civilian Acquisition Agency Council, as well as the DAR Council, and looking at best practices either in DOD or in the civilian agencies. And we're going to put them together as a compendium. The hope is that it's not just like a PDF standalone document, but that people will actually be able to get in there and use things. It could be some template-based information, but also some dashboard information and other kinds of electronic media that people will be able to use and then apply to their particular circumstance.
Is that CAC the primary methodology for other agencies to be involved with this revision?
It is. It's actually the main way for people to be involved. One of the things I do want to make sure our industry partners, we want them to be involved as well. So as we upload each one of of the parts to the www.acquisition.gov site. There is a location for people to be able to upload comments to each one of those FAR parts. Once we're done with all parts of the FAR, we will then entertain and go into rulemaking, formal rulemaking for all of the FAR as a whole. And then at that point, we'll go through the traditional rulemaking process, and everybody will get a chance to comment.
What does that mean for the timeline? What do you expect the entire revision to look like and from a timeline perspective? And what do you expect the parts that NASA in particular is working on to look like?
Well, for NASA's part, I can speak to the pieces that we own. We expect to be done probably about with the July timeframe for everything that we're assigned. We do have a smaller portion of the parts than some of our two sister agencies, but we will be done by September 30th per the EO with all of the parts of the FAR. And Dr. Rhodes has been very emphatic that that is our due date. At the end of the conclusion of September, we'll gather up all of those comments that have been uploaded electronically to the acquisition.gov site. We're going to take a look at all of the parts. We may actually combine some of the parts. So the way that you see the parts of the FAR today may be combined, or it may be standing alone the way that it is now. And then we'll move into rulemaking the same way that you've understood it to be. Our hope would be it would be another 6 months or so, but there are many other regulatory agencies, as you're well aware of. It might be OIRA and things that have to take place. We're not ruling out public comment or public meetings, I should say. So it'll take as long as it takes, but we are wanting to roll this out as soon as possible. And we're excited about this. Is a transformational activity for us across the federal government. It's a once in a career. The last time we did this was 41 years ago, right? So we're excited about the opportunity that the Trump administration is giving us to be able to kind of rewrite the rule book.
We have about a minute left, Carla. You mentioned earlier that the goal is better outcomes in contracting.
Right.
How would you measure that at some future point to determine whether this once-in-a-career opportunity, whether you leveraged it to the extent that you hope to?
Well, initial measurement is going to be based on the size. Did we make it smaller? So we're looking at page count, we're looking at word count. So we'll have those measurements or measures of effectiveness. But we always want to look at cycle time. We want to look at our ability to be able to put out requirements. We're going to look at our opportunities with respect to consolidation of procurement. There's another EO right now where GSA is consolidating procurement activities for common spend items. We want to look at the opportunities that we have to be able to use our workforce more effectively for specialization and leverage the talent that we have. So those metrics will be rolled out, I feel like, within the next year to 2 years, and we will have industry working with us on those kind of things.
I wish we had a chance to talk more about the NAIL and the work you're doing there. You have to come back so we can do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for being here, Carla.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You can read more about the NAIL and the FAR overhaul on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, good news and bad news about AI for cyber defenders. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
Innovation doesn't wait, and neither do we. At Maximus, we solve problems, streamlining operations, delivering solutions at speed and scale that drive measurable results. From strategy to execution, we simplify complexity, building trust through expertise and innovative technology. Every service, every time. Efficient government delivered. We don't follow innovation. We drive it. Maximus.
If you're looking for real answers about securing the cloud in government, you'll find them on Cloud Security In Depth, presented by Cisco.
In the era of AI, leveraging data is super important. It's what feeds machine learning and ultimately decision-making. And such, protecting data is paramount to the enterprises that we work with across the federal government. That said, to do that successfully and effectively, you have to have a unified policy and visibility. It's having an effective unified control capability with your SecOps. So your security ops to support what your mission ops or your ConOps plans are. But the end user has a mission to perform, and the complexity doesn't matter. It's got to be, easily executable. So in that case, it's balancing that effectiveness with security and safety, and then the trustworthiness of data.
Welcome back. The cyber force at the Department of Defense is about to get smaller. The director of the Defense Information Systems Agency, Lieutenant General Paul Stanton, tells Congress his cyber team could shrink by 10%. Katie Bowen is Senior Vice President of Global Revenue at SYNACT. Katie, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. How is that shrinking of the workforce at DISA potentially going to impact the way the department secures itself and the way that it interacts with the DIB to secure the DIB?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for having me today. I think we're going to see some far-reaching effects. The look to bringing in more COTS solutions as well. We've seen a few zero trust options come to market for DoD organizations in the last couple months. I think that begs the question around the efficacy and adoption of those solutions. And from our point of view, the testing of those solutions as well. We're seeing some other testing and evaluation workforces be cut too. So that's something on our minds for sure is, how do you do some of that testing in a more modern way and a more modern approach?
What are the ways that you would like to see the department go about doing that testing? And CMMC, as we will talk about later in this program, is here to stay. There's a whole lot of moving parts with cyber in the department right now.
Absolutely. We want to see, an integrated security testing fabric. Dynamic application security testing and tools have largely failed us over the last, 10, 15 years. I think, that's why bug bounty programs have become so prevalent, as those vulnerabilities have made their way to production. And those DAST tools were only as good as what was known or out there at the time. We're going to see with the rise of agentic AI, the ability to focus really significantly on that pre-production and efficacy and security of those pieces of software before they make their way to production.
Randy Resnick was on the program last week talking about the zero trust solutions, the 3 that are on the market now. Mm-hmm. There are more, he promised, coming to market by the end of the year. Is there a risk that people could start to think of those as plug-and-play solutions when, in fact, he said they're not?
Exactly.
They're not that.
Exactly. He clearly outlined that organizations within the DoD can acquire any of those solutions, and they really have to look at where they place them, and then, from our point of view, test the efficacy of those solutions as well.
Artificial intelligence is playing a role in everything.
Yes.
What is the integration of AI into the cybersecurity defenses of the department look like in your view? What are the risks and the potential benefits that you see?
Yeah, I think, with agentic AI, we're going to see what used to be workforces of hundreds now be, very significantly smaller, but managing a team of AI agents to accomplish a number of tasks, security tasks or otherwise. I think we're seeing a very large rise in the AI SOC, where, when some of the initial machine learning logging capabilities came out years ago, it created alert fatigue. So we're always looking at how do we get the cleanest signal in the noise, and that's a lot of what we do as well. We want to get you the cleanest signal from an exploitable vulnerability standpoint, and that is going to happen much faster. We have time to exploit being managed or reported now at an average of 2 days. It's going to be hours with the rise of agentic AI, but on both the adversary and the defender side.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the risk versus reward calculation, I guess, that people are thinking about, right? What can we do, the good guys, versus what are the bad guys going to try to do to us?
Absolutely, which you're going to see a lot of attack surfaces continue to shrink. But for the government, we're in the mission, we're providing and offering services to the people. Those attack surfaces can't always shrink, so we have to do a better job before that software gets to production in securing those applications.
We have about a minute and a half left. What are the things that you will track and that you would like to see the department track among all of these issues that we've discussed in kind of the out months, year, 2 years from now, as these solutions really start to deploy and be used?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big question on many people's minds is what is the true cost of security testing and security across the DoD? And so to be able to manage and talk about that in a way that is outcome driven versus output driven, I think is going to be very powerful as some of these new solutions come to market. There's also the question of these air gap networks. There's an assumed breach there, right? We need to make sure that we're securing those just as we secure the software that's on the open or internet facing. So those are things that I think you can manage efficacy, MTTR on a continual basis, and really implement that security testing fabric into your organization.
Katie, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
You can read more about cyber and AI on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, CMMC is here to stay for real. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
Are data centers going away? No. I believe there's a purpose for data centers, especially as we look at hybrid models, or if we have very sensitive data, do they stay in the data centers and I bring the AI to my data center? So to me, yes, we've been doing cloud for 13 or more years, but we're just starting, I believe, in this whole multi-cloud arena, AI, and what is that going to look like for us? And that's exciting.
To be able to make OSINT practitioners good consumers of the technology, and to be able to, AI is fantastic, but garbage in, garbage out, right? And so if we're not 100% certain we have high quality data, then all the computational capability in the world is not going to make this data any better on the out.
Without the connections, I found years ago that, technologists would put a tool on an analyst's desk and they'd say, this is great, and the analyst would never use it because it wasn't what they needed. And so I think that opportunities like this will help increase that cross-pollination and teach both sides what the other one needs.
Welcome back. Leaders in the Department of Defense say the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Framework isn't going away, including Katie Arrington on this show about 2 months ago. Stacy Busjanek is Chief for Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity in the Office of the Chief Information Officer at DoD. At TechNet Cyber recently, I asked her why the department thinks it needs to keep telling people CMMC isn't going away.
To impose any kind of regulation on industry, we have to go through the rulemaking process. And the rulemaking process is actually a fairly elongated, arduous, laborious process. We have completed the 32 CFR, which was the part that establishes CMMC as a program, right? So that published in December, which allows the current C3 PAOs to begin performing assessments on industry. We now have to follow through with the 48. That's about 3/4 of the way through the process. And that should hopefully be coming out by the end of the summer. We still have some hurdles to get over with the Trump administration's requirement to delete 10 rules for every one new rule. And we're trying to work to make sure we can get an exemption or figure out how we move through that as fast as possible to go ahead and get the program put in place. I think throughout industry, there's been a lot of concern that it's never really going to happen. I think when we had the first transition from the first Trump administration into the Biden administration, the Biden administration paused all efforts moving forward and wanted to reassess the program to make sure that we weren't being overly difficult for industry and imposing too much on them. And that's why you saw when we initially started with CMMC, we added about 20 extra requirements on top of the NIST 800-171 to bring that cyber maturity into the program. And what happened was when we did the relook, we decided to break it back just to the NIST 800-171 that they'd always been required to do since about 2014, 2015, right? And a definitive requirement starting December of 2017, they had to comply with it. Now, like we talked before, I think one of the reasons why we had to come up with CMMC is the fact that the original 7012 clause said they had to have a system security plan and a POAM to get there. Now, our expectation was everybody would say, well, if they want me to do this, I'll do it. They took us extremely literally. And they had a system security plan that oftentimes was copied and pasted from somebody else. We saw companies with 25 people with a 500-page system security plan that had a blank that said insert name here. Oh, gosh. Right? We had other companies that had POAMs that went out to $20.99, right? So I'll be dead before they ever get to any of the requirements. But by the letter of the law, they were compliant with the 7012 clause. Mm-hmm. So when we had there was a DoD IG investigation done and the Navy Cyber Readiness Review that back in 2019 went out and looked and said, how are people doing with this? They basically found out they really weren't. And so that's when then Secretary Shanahan kind of raised the alarm that we've got to make sure that the people who are handling our data and information are handling it appropriately. So that's how we ended up with CMMC where we are today.
What's the timeline in your view moving forward for when companies have to do whatever it is companies have to do at the same time? At the same time, you don't want it to just be a compliance exercise.
That's exactly correct. You know, in fact, we have seen Army has put out an RFI that says, hey, we're going to have an RFP coming out in August, and our intent is there needs to be a CMMC certification requirement as part of this contract. So it's coming. There is a great interest in the department to have companies that are compliant, that can safeguard our data, because, you know, we've seen our adversaries have the plans for the F-35, they've had the plans for the F-22, you know, and they didn't have to spend the millions and billions of dollars that we as taxpayers spent to develop these. They just came in and stole them in a 15-minute download, right? And so now when my children who are of military age would go into armed conflict against our adversaries, they've got the exact same weapon system that they're dealing with. I'm having to say that these kids are going to have to depend on their skill level to make sure that they can come home to their mom to take care of her in her old age, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't want my kids to have to be solely dependent on their skill. I want them to have the superior weapon system under their feet and in their hands so they can make sure they come home.
A lot of Chinese hardware looks remarkably similar to
And Russian.
And Russian looks remarkably similar to hardware that vendors that are in this room are building and have built. Another item that you are talking about here is the SWIFT program.
Yes.
And that is something that comes directly from the Secretary of Defense, at least the goals that he's established for the department.
Yes. So the SWIFT program is going to be voluntary, at least at the outset. And that's, you know, so we don't have to go through the rulemaking process. And so, you know, one of the biggest complaints that we hear from industry today is that it takes so long for the department to adopt their software. And one of the reasons is we have to do our due diligence to ensure that the pedigree of the software is good, that there's no malware built into it, those types of things. So this program will allow companies to take that initial step first, right? They'll be able to go to a third-party vendor and get a SBOM, a software bill of material developed. They then will go to a third-party assessment company, and the 3 PAOs for FedRAMP are doing this kind of work today to evaluate and kind of assess that software to ensure that it meets the requirements. And then they'll bring that to the department, and we will ingest that information. We'll do our due diligence. On top of that, we're looking for an AI tool. In fact, we released 3 RFIs on Friday, one for a third-party SBOM requirement, one for the assessment capability, and then one for this AI tool that we will use to evaluate their body of evidence that they give us. Then we'll use whatever other information that we may have in the department to validate that. And then we'll build a database, and we will record in the supplier performance risk system that these software packages have kind of met the baseline requirements so that our services can discover them and be able to ingest them and adopt them in a faster, more efficient manner.
I was derelict in my duty. SWIFT is SWFT, Software Fast Track.
Yes, sir.
And what do you expect to cut timeline-wise if SWIFT works the way that you want it to? What's the difference between what you'll get versus what you're getting now?
I think we should be able to cut the timeline at least in half, if not more, right? So the fact that they've done the work to go out and get us this body of evidence will expedite the process exponentially.
How will you judge the effectiveness of it? What will you look at between today and when you've decided it's working the way that you want it to make sure that it is doing what you want?
So there's several metrics that we are going to look at. Timeline, right? How long does it take us to adopt that? How many of these software packages actually get adopted by the services and put into practice and use, right? Will be a big effort. And then the cost, right? Where are we today since it's voluntary, companies don't have to do it. They can go, I laugh, we can do it the easy way or the hard way. The hard way means you're going to leave it to the department to do the due diligence and all of that background. And so we'll be able to judge how much it costs the department versus how much it costs, with or without that body of evidence, how long it takes, and then the adoption rate.
What else should these companies be paying attention to as they're working through this SWIFT process?
So, I think SWIFT and CMMC, right? One of the main thrusts that we need to get through as a nation, and I always laugh and say I should have like America the Beautiful playing in the background, but, it's a real national security issue that we have software that has bad stuff in it that causes us problems, right? And we know today that there are active adversaries pursuing us, right? You've heard of Salt Typhoon. You've heard of Volt Typhoon. There's a new one that just came out. There's another typhoon that's coming out, right? And so we are constantly every day being barraged by our adversaries trying to steal our data, trying to steal our information, to get a leg up on us by using the time, energy, and money that we spend as a nation to develop capabilities, right? So they're the cheaters in the class, right? We've done all the hard work. We've spent the money. We've studied. We've spent the time, right? I worked for NavAir when they were developing the F-35. I remember when those engineers were working 24 hours a day to figure out how to fix the glitches that were in that initial prototype, right? These guys, blood, sweat, and tears, billions of dollars, and we're going to sit back and be lazy and not get on top of our cybersecurity and let these people just continue robbing us of our intellectual property and our innovation?
You can read more about CMMC on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in a moment. What are the opportunities that you see for using artificial intelligence to drive innovation in the maritime space?
I think we're seeing a lot of use cases that are really expanding. I think initially we look at things like mission planning, we look at search and analysis, and the use cases that have changed and evolved are due to the speed of which in the maritime organizations here in the Navy, they're able to realize the benefits of this and more use cases than they thought they had.
FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. The Chief Information Officer of the Coast Guard, Rear Admiral Rusty Dash, is here. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching and have a great week. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.